Hello and welcome to the channel of Hashalier once again. I hope you're all doing well. The question this morning is it right to name names? Well, for the purposes of answering this question, I want us to go to the scriptures. And specifically, I'm going to look at a number of scriptures from the books that Paul wrote to Timothy, 1 and 2 Timothy, and 3 John. So, is it right to name names? So, I'm going to start in 2 Timothy, and I'm going to read verse 15. You know that everyone in the province of Asia turned away from me, including Phygellus and Hermogenes. So, we see two names being named straight away in 2 Timothy chapter 1. Everyone in the province of Asia turned away from Paul, and it said including Phygellus and Hermogenes. Now, why would he say including these two names? They were obviously known to Paul, and maybe he's even saying it in a surprising way. Now, just jumping across to 2 Timothy 4, I want to read verse 16. This is Paul. The first time I had to present my defence, no one stood by me. Everyone deserted me. May it not be counted against him. Now, this is Paul presenting his defence in Rome. And we are told everyone deserted him. And it may be that Phygellus and Hermogenes were two of those that had deserted Paul. But he certainly names them in that particular chapter of 2 Timothy, chapter 1. Now, let's jump across to 2 Timothy chapter 2. So we're in the second chapter now of 2 Timothy. I'm going to start in verse 15. Do all you can to present yourself to God as someone worthy of his approval, as a worker with no need to be ashamed, because he deals straightforwardly with the word of truth. Now, you've heard me mention this verse a number of times because it's one of the first verses the Lord gave to me when I got saved. Verse 16, but keep away from godless babbling, for those who engage in it will only become more ungodly, and their teaching will eat away at people like gangrene or cancer. Hymenaeus and Philetus are among these. They have missed the mark as far as the truth is concerned by saying that a resurrection has already taken place, and they are overturning some people's faith. So Paul mentions Hymenaeus and Philetus, two people who are obviously teaching within the Christian church, but their teaching is bad. It's like gangrene, it's like cancer. And Paul feels the need to name these names to Timothy, who in turn can pass this information on to other people. These are two teachers within the church. Be very careful of these because they're not teaching properly. They're not teaching properly. Now, I'm just going to turn back to 1 Timothy chapter 1. I want to read from 18 to 20. This charge, son Timothy, I put to you, in keeping with the prophecies already made about you, so that by these prophecies you may fight the good fight, armed with trust and a good conscience. By rejecting conscience, some have made shipwreck of their trust. Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander. I have turned them over to the adversary, so that they will learn not to insult God. Hymenaeus mentioned again. along with a guy called Alexander. Now remember that name Alexander, because that's going to crop up again. But Hymenaeus is mentioned here again. Paul says, he says, I've turned them over to the adversary, to Satan, so that they will learn not to insult God. Where do we hear that sort of thing about? Because back in Corinthians, I think it's 1 Corinthians 5 or 2 Corinthians 5, but it's in one of the epistles to the Corinthians, where Paul is concerned about a man in the congregation who's having relations with his mother-in-law, and he instructs the church to put him out of the church. And Paul says, I have already handed this one across to Satan for the destruction of his body, so that his soul may be saved in the day of Christ Jesus. So there's another situation where Paul hands someone across to Satan. What a thing to happen. What a thing when a mighty man of God uses his authority in Christ to hand you across to Satan. It happened to Hymenaeus and Alexander and this man in Corinthians. What a situation. What a situation, friends. Not good. And then we come to chapter 3. So we see a couple of names mentioned in 2 Timothy 1, a couple of names mentioned in 2 Timothy chapter 2, and now we're in chapter 3. I'll start in verse 5. Actually, I'll start in verse 1. Chapter 3, verse 1. Moreover, understand this, in the Akhirat Hayamim, the end of days, will come trying times. People will be self-loving, money-loving, proud, arrogant, insulting, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, uncontrolled, brutal, hateful of good, traitorous, headstrong, swollen with conceit, loving pleasure rather than God, as they retain the outer form of religion, but deny its power. Stay away from these people, for some of them worm their way into homes and get control of weak-willed women who are heaped with sins and swayed by various impulses, who are always learning but never able to come to full knowledge of the truth. In the same way as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moshe, so also these people oppose the truth. They are people with corrupted minds whose trust cannot pass the test. However, they won't get very far because everyone will see how stupid they are, just as happened with those two. Jannes and Jambres, the two magicians of Pharaoh. Now, these could be put in the unbeliever category because they were part of Pharaoh's sorcerers and magicians. But the point is, Paul names their names because they opposed God's people, they opposed Moses. So we see people within the church who are opposing the truth and teaching bad things, and Paul feels it necessary to name them. But now he names a couple of unbelievers as well. The point is, Paul is not shy in naming names. Now we come across to 2 Timothy chapter 4, and let us go to verse 10. For Demas, because he has fallen in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone off to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus has gone to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. But Demas is fallen in love with this present world, and he has deserted Paul. So, who is Demas? Who is Demas? Well, I'm just going to pop back to make sure I get this right. Philemon. We're going to go back to Philemon. Go forward to Philemon. I want to just read from chapter 1. Well, there is only one chapter. Verses 23 and 24. Philemon 23 and 24. Epaphras, my fellow prisoner for the sake of the Messiah Yeshua, sends greetings to you, as do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke, my fellow workers. So Demas is one of Paul's fellow workers, but now he's deserted Paul. And we can come across Demas again in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14. Our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send you greetings. So Demas was one of the co-workers with Paul the Apostle and Luke. But he's named as someone who has deserted Paul. And again, this might be referencing verse 16 in 2 Timothy 4. The first time I had to present my defence, no one stood by me. Everyone deserted me. May it not be counted against them. So Demas, it says, having loved this present world, he couldn't take the pressure anymore. He couldn't hack it. And so he deserts Paul in Rome and sets sail and takes off, leaving Paul all by himself. But Paul knew he had the Lord. Believers and unbelievers are mentioned here. And now we stay in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and we go to verse 14. Alexander, the metal worker, did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will render to him according to his works. And you should guard against him, because he bitterly opposed everything we said. Now remember earlier on I said, remember that name Alexander? Alexander was mentioned along with Hymenaeus in 2 Timothy. In 2 Timothy 2, 15 to 17. So Alexander's mentioned, and we actually read about him in Acts as well. But he is another one that's mentioned. It says, he did me a great deal of harm. Watch out for him, Timothy. Be aware of this man. And let us finally turn to 3 John. 3 John. Starting in verse 9. I wrote something to the congregation. This is John, the apostle, writing. I wrote something to the congregation, but Diotrephes, who loves to put himself first among them, doesn't recognize our authority. So if I come, I will bring up everything he is doing, including his spiteful and groundless gossip about us. And as if that weren't enough for him, he refuses to recognize the brother's authority either. Moreover, he stops those who want to do so and tries to drive them out of the congregation. It is believed that Diotrephes was a leader in the Christian church, but he loved all the glory for himself. And he wasn't interested in Paul and the other brothers and sisters. He wouldn't allow anybody to say anything. He was a heavy-handed type of shepherd, control freak, and he wasn't interested in letting anybody else have the pulpit, because the pulpit belonged to Diotrephes. But we see this time and again. Now, I believe this is a very timely message. But Paul mentions Phygellus, Hermogenes, believed to be Christians, Alexander, the metalworker, Hymenaeus, Philetus, Jannes and Jambres, who are unbelievers, Pharaoh's magicians, Demas, Diotrephes. There's quite, and there's other names mentioned, but that's quite a handful there. Now, I think it's very timely. because I just like to make you aware there are some big names in the Christian church today who are being investigated, and they are going to be outed. Names are going to be named, and some of them are going to shock you. They're going to truly shock you. People who you might have thought was trustworthy, people who you might even have been listening to. But these things are going to shock you. But Paul thought nothing of it to name the names. I want to finish with this. It is biblical, it's scriptural to name names. But always check your own heart first. Don't just go off running, shooting your mouth off, naming names left, right, and centre. What is the motive behind it? If you read through Paul, his motive was always to warn the church, and in other cases to see people turned round. This is why he hands them across to the adversary, so that they will be taught to trust in God, put their faith in God. He was always looking to turn people around, but he also thought it was very important to warn people about certain people in the church. And he didn't just say, oh, there's a guy here or there's a guy there. He actually named the names so that the people of the day could be alerted to the dangers within the church. So I will finish it there. Is it right to name names? Yes. But always check your own motives first, your own heart. May God bless you this day.